Every New Year's Eve, when the world celebrates with laughter and cheers, there's a darker tradition whispered among those who know the tale. It's called the New Year's Eve lottery. No one knows who started it or why it continues, but the stories are always the same. A handful of people receive mysterious invitations, and one of them wins a prize they will never forget. The legend says the lottery isn't like any other. It doesn't promise wealth, fame, or happiness. It promises something far more sinister. Those who have participated in the past are never seen again. Some believe the winners are taken to another world. Others think they become part of the game itself, trapped forever. Still, the invitations continue to arrive, silent and unnoticed, slipping through mailboxes like ghostly whispers. This year, the story takes us to the heart of the city, where the streets are filled with sparkling lights and the air hums with excitement. Yet, behind the joy, a shadow lurks, a shadow that will change one man's life forever. Ethan sat alone in his dimly lit apartment, staring at the peeling wallpaper as the sounds of New Year's celebrations echoed faintly from the streets below. He hadn't left the building in weeks, too weighed down by the crushing reality of his life. Just a year ago, he had a steady job, a small circle of friends, and hopes for the future. But one bad decision after another had left him jobless, drowning in debt, and utterly alone. He had always believed things would get better until they didn't. His savings were gone, his landlord was threatening eviction, and his phone calls to old friends went unanswered. Ethan had no family left to turn to, no one to pull him out of the deep, dark hole he had fallen into. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, marking the end of a year he wished he could forget, Ethan felt the weight of hopelessness press against his chest. What was the point of moving forward? What would change in 2025? Nothing, he thought bitterly. The world outside might be celebrating a fresh start, but for him, it was just another day in the same miserable cycle. Just as he sank deeper into his thoughts, a sharp knock broke the silence. Startled, Ethan turned toward the door. He wasn't expecting anyone. Hesitant, he shuffled across the room and opened it. No one was there. Only the cold night air greeted him. But when he looked down, his breath caught. An elegant black envelope lay on the doormat, its edges gleaming faintly under the hallway light. His name was written in flowing, golden script. It was flawless, almost unnatural. Ethan frowned, his heart pounding as he picked it up. There was no address, no postage, just his name. He returned to his chair and carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single card, its surface smooth as glass. The message was simple, yet unsettling. You have been chosen for the New Year's Eve lottery. Join us at midnight. Your fortune awaits. There was no signature, no further instructions, just an address scrawled beneath the words. Ethan read the card over and over, his mind racing. It had to be a joke, he thought, but something about it didn't feel right. A strange sensation crept over him, a mix of dread and curiosity. Ethan had nothing left to lose, or so he believed. Maybe this was his chance to escape his miserable life. Or maybe, he thought with a chill, it was something far worse. The address on the card led Ethan to the outskirts of the city, far from the bright lights and celebrations. He had debated going for hours, but curiosity gnawed at him like a living thing. What could this lottery be? What did it mean by fortune? With no better options and nowhere else to be, he finally decided to see it through. The location was an old mansion, one Ethan had never noticed before. Its towering structure loomed in the darkness, lit only by a faint, flickering glow from its windows. The building looked ancient, its walls cracked and weathered, yet something about it felt alive, like it was watching him as he approached. He hesitated on the crumbling steps, his instincts screaming to turn back, but a strange pull kept him moving forward. Inside us, the air was thick and cold. A grand chandelier hung above a spacious hall, casting long, eerie shadows that danced on the walls. The room was silent, except for the faint creak of the floorboards beneath his feet. Ethan wasn't alone. A small group of people stood scattered across the room, their faces as uncertain as his. There was a middle-aged woman clutching her purse tightly, a young businessman in an expensive suit, and an elderly man leaning on a cane. They all looked out of place, their expressions uneasy. No one spoke. They avoided each other's gazes, as if afraid to acknowledge they were all part of the same mystery. Ethan joined them quietly, holding the card in his hand like it was a lifeline. Moments later, the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps echoed through the hall. A tall man in a sharp black suit entered the room, his presence commanding and unnerving. His face was pale, almost too perfect, and his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Welcome," the man said, his voice smooth but chilling. "You are all here because you have been chosen. Tonight, one of you will receive the fortune of a lifetime. The rest..." He paused, his smile shading ever so slightly. The rest will leave unchanged. The silence in the room grew heavier. Ethan's stomach churned. The man didn't explain what the fortune was or why they had been chosen, but his words carried an ominous weight. Ethan glanced at the others. They looked just as uneasy, their faces pale in the dim light. The man gestured to a small table in the center of the room. On it sat a black velvet bag. "The rules are simple," he continued. "Each of you will draw a token from this bag. One of the tokens is marked. The one who draws it will be the winner." The group exchanged nervous glances. Ethan felt his palms sweat as the reality of the situation sank in. This wasn't an ordinary lottery. There was something deeply wrong here, something no one could put into words. Yet, one by one, they stepped forward, drawn by a mix of fear and the faint hope that maybe, just maybe, this would change their lives. Ethan's turn came. His heart pounded as he reached into the bag, the soft fabric brushing against his fingers. He felt the smooth surface of the tokens and pulled one out, dreading what he might see. The room seemed to hold its breath as he turned the token over in his hand. There, etched into the surface, was a faint but unmistakable mark. Ethan was the winner. The man in the suit smiled wider, his teeth gleaming like knives. "Congratulations," he said softly. "Your fortune awaits." Ethan's breath caught as the others stared at him, their expressions a mix of envy and relief. But deep down, he felt no joy, only an overwhelming sense that he had just made the worst mistake of his life. Ethan's legs felt weak as he stood there, clutching the marked token. The others were staring at him, their expressions shifting from relief to something darker. Unease, maybe even pity. He wanted to say something, to ask what would happen next, but his throat felt dry and his voice refused to come. The man in the suit stepped closer, his polished shoes clicking softly against the floor. "Follow me," he said, gesturing toward a door at the far end of the hall. His tone was calm, almost pleasant, but it carried an undertone that made Ethan's skin crawl. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow hallway dimly lit by flickering wall sconces. Ethan hesitated, glancing back at the others. None of them moved. They stood frozen, their eyes fixed on him as if they knew something he didn't. A shiver ran down his spine. "Come now," the man urged, his smile never faltering. "Your fortune won't wait forever." Ethan swallowed hard and forced his legs to move. As he stepped through the doorway, the air grew colder and the sounds of the main hall faded behind him. The hallway seemed endless, its walls lined with faded portraits of faces that seemed to watch him as he passed. He kept his gaze forward, refusing to look too closely. Something about those eyes felt wrong. At the end of the hallway was another door, this one larger, and carved with intricate patterns that seemed to writhe under the dim light. The man pushed it open, revealing a grand room unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. It was lavishly decorated, with gold-trimmed furniture, a massive crystal chandelier, and a long table set for a feast. Yet, despite its opulence, the room felt lifeless, like a stage waiting for a terrible play to begin. In the center of the room stood a large, ornate mirror. Its frame was twisted and jagged, as if it had been forged from raw, blackened metal. The glass itself seemed almost liquid, rippling faintly as Ethan approached. "This," the man said, gesturing to the mirror, "is where your fortune begins." Ethan frowned, his unease growing with every word. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. The man's smile widened. "All you have to do is look into the mirror and make your wish. It will show you the life you've always dreamed of. Wealth, success, happiness, whatever your heart desires." Ethan stared at the mirror, his reflection distorted by the faint ripples. It sounded too good to be true, and deep down he knew it probably was. But what choice did he have? His life was already in ruins. If there was even a chance that this could change things, wasn't it worth the risk? He stepped closer, the air around the mirror growing colder. "And that's it?" he asked, his voice trembling. "I just make a wish?" The man nodded, his expression unreadable. "That's it, but remember, every fortune has its price." Ethan's heart pounded as he looked into the mirror. His reflection stared back, pale and anxious, but as he focused, the image began to change. He saw himself standing in a grand office, dressed in an expensive suit, surrounded by wealth and power. He saw smiles, laughter, a life he had always dreamed of. "I wish for success," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I wish for a better life." The mirror's surface rippled violently, and for a moment, Ethan thought he saw something move within it, something dark and twisted. The room grew colder still, and a faint, sinister whisper filled the air. The man in the suit stepped back, his smile fading as his expression turned grim. "Congratulations," he said softly. "Your wish has been granted." Before Ethan could respond, the mirror's surface exploded outward, swallowing the room in darkness. He felt himself being pulled, his body twisting and contorting as if it were being reshaped. Pain shot through him, and his screams echoed into the void. When the darkness faded, Ethan was no longer in the grand room. He stood in an unfamiliar place, surrounded by strangers who looked at him with the same uneasy pity he had seen in the others before. In his hands, he held a black envelope with golden script. His reflection appeared in a nearby window, and he froze. The face staring back wasn't his own. It was twisted, monstrous, a horrifying amalgamation of every fear and regret he had ever felt. The whispers returned, louder now, echoing in his mind. Every fortune has its price. And in that moment, Ethan understood. He wasn't the winner of the lottery, he was its next prisoner. Ethan's breath came in ragged gasps as he stumbled away from the window, his heart pounding in his chest. The reflection in the glass didn't move as he did. It remained frozen, staring at him with twisted eyes and a grotesque, mocking grin. He backed into a cold wall, his mind racing with confusion and terror. What had he done? What was happening to him? The room he stood in was no longer the grand, opulent hall he had entered moments ago. It was dark, decayed, and suffocatingly silent. The lavish furniture was gone, replaced by broken chairs and cobweb-covered tables. The chandelier above him was nothing more than a rusted frame, its crystals shattered and scattered across the floor. The once polished floors were now cracked and stained with what looked like dried blood. The envelope in his hand felt heavier now, almost burning his skin. He forced himself to look down at it, the golden script shimmering faintly in the darkness. New words had appeared beneath his name. Welcome to the cycle. Your service begins now. The door behind him slammed shut with a deafening bang, and Ethan spun around, his pulse racing. He tried to open it, pulling and pounding on it desperately, but it wouldn't budge. A cold, mocking laugh echoed through the room, sending chills down his spine. It wasn't coming from any one direction, it was everywhere, surrounding him. "Who's there?" Ethan shouted, his voice trembling. "What do you want from me?" The laugh grew louder, deeper, resonating with an inhuman tone. Slowly, the mirror he had wished into began to ripple again. This time, the surface didn't show his reflection or the distorted dreams he had seen before. Instead, it revealed faces, dozens of them. They were the faces of the other participants he had seen earlier, their expressions frozen in terror. They were screaming silently, their mouths open wide as if they were trapped inside the mirror itself. Ethan stumbled backward, his chest heaving. The faces began to change, morphing into monstrous visages, their eyes glowing with hatred and despair. They seemed to look directly at him, their mouths moving as if whispering secrets he couldn't hear. The room grew colder, and his breath came out in visible puffs. "You're one of us now," a voice hissed behind him. Ethan spun around, his blood running cold as he saw the man in the suit standing there. But the man wasn't human anymore. His once perfect face was cracked and hollow, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light. His smile was gone, replaced by a gaping black void that seemed to consume the air around him. "This is the price of your fortune," the man continued, his voice echoing unnaturally. "The lottery is not a gift, it's a trap. We all pay for our wishes in the end." Ethan's legs gave out, and he collapsed to the floor, shaking his head. "No," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "This isn't what I wanted. I didn't ask for this." The man's hollow laughter filled the room. "You asked for success, didn't you? Now you will succeed in carrying the burden for others. The lottery must go on. Someone has to pay the price." The mirror began to ripple again, and Ethan felt a cold force pulling him toward it. He tried to fight, clawing at the floor, but it was no use. The faces in the mirror seemed to reach out for him, their twisted hands clawing at the air. As he was dragged closer, he felt his body change, his skin growing cold and brittle, his bones aching as if they were breaking apart. "No, please!" Ethan screamed, his voice echoing in the empty room. "Let me go! I didn't know." His words were cut off as the mirror consumed him, swallowing him whole. The rippling surface stilled, and the room fell silent once more. When the door finally opened again, it wasn't Ethan who stepped out. It was someone else, a new participant, clutching an envelope with golden script. The lottery had begun anew, and Ethan was now just another face in the cursed mirror, waiting for the next victim. The mansion's grand hall was silent once again, the eerie stillness broken only by the faint sound of footsteps. A new participant, a young woman clutching her own black envelope, hesitantly stepped inside. She looked around, her face pale and uneasy, as her eyes took in the decayed opulence of the room. The chandelier above her flickered weakly, casting shifting shadows across the cracked walls. As she moved deeper into the hall, she noticed the mirror standing ominously at the center. Its surface was smooth and still, but something about it felt wrong, like it was watching her. She approached cautiously, her breathing shallow, and stopped a few feet away, drawn by a strange, unexplainable pull. Her eyes widened as she noticed the faint shapes moving within the glass. At first, they seemed like tricks of the light, shadows dancing on the surface. But as she looked closer, the shapes took form. Faces, twisted and grotesque, their eyes wide with terror. They pressed against the glass, their mouths moving silently as if screaming for help. Among the faces, one stood out, a man with hollow eyes and a distorted, inhuman grin. His features were familiar, yet horrifyingly altered. It was Ethan. His once hopeful expression was gone, replaced by a look of eternal despair. His hands clawed at the inside of the mirror as if begging to escape. But the surface remained unbroken. The woman stepped back, her heart pounding. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Before she could move farther, a deep, chilling voice echoed through the hall. "Welcome to the New Year's Eve lottery," it said, smooth yet devoid of warmth. The man in the suit appeared once more, stepping from the shadows as if he had been there all along. His perfect appearance was intact, but his eyes betrayed a cold, otherworldly presence. "It's your turn to play," he continued, his smile sharp as a blade. "Will you be the winner, or will you join the others?" The woman shook her head, backing away toward the door. "I don't want this," she stammered. I didn't ask for this." The man chuckled softly, a sound that sent chills down her spine. "None of them did," he said, gesturing toward the mirror. "But the lottery chooses who it will, and its price must always be paid." The mirror began to ripple again, the faces inside growing more frantic as they writhed and clawed at the surface. The air grew colder, and the woman felt her body freeze in place, unable to move, as the man approached her with a black velvet bag. "Draw your token," he said, holding it out to her, "and let fate decide." The screen fades to black, leaving only the faint sound of the woman's scream echoing in the darkness. As the haunting silence returns, the final words appear on the screen. "The New Year's Eve lottery always finds its winner. Will you be next?" The chilling, lingering question leaves the viewer with a sense of dread, the story ending on a dark and unsettling note.